the savior who doesn't quite know it, the humble guy who becomes
Johnny Depp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a role like this, in a role of 12th century French guy just wandering through,
But like if Johnny Depp was in this movie, he'd be like, "Hey, can I wear this crazy hat?"
I have an opium addiction.
Then,
I don't know how to get past this.
Ridley would be like, "Take off the hat, Johnny," and he'd be like,
But my
"No,
opium.
I really think this crazy hat really adds to my character. I'm gonna keep the hat, Ridley."
Oh. We can't. We're gonna get sued for using the likeness.
Because that was a perfect imitation
rendition
of the soundtrack of this film.
My God.
Hello.
My God in heaven.
My God in heaven. My name is John.
My name is Pri.
This is The Low Ceiling.
And today we're talking about
Neon Demon 2.
No.
Kingdom of Heaven.
To Kingdom to Heaven.
To Kingdom to Heaven.
My God. This is the part where Legolas saves Jerusalem in the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Hell yeah.
And it is a sick fucking movie.
I mean, yeah, let's just cut to the chase.
Kingdom of Heaven. Ugh.
Straight for the jugular.
Ridley Scott, you son of a gun.
I want to... so right off the bat, let's be clear.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the Roadshow director's cut version of Kingdom of Heaven.
Goddamn right.
And the reason we're talking about it is because the theatrical cut in its release, people were like, well, that sucked. And then Ridley was like, no, it actually didn't. And so he created a 4-hour cut of this film.
Yeah.
And was like, see? And everyone was like, Ridley, God damn it. You done it.
You
did it again. Yeah, actually, I also welcome to Scott Fest, where we talk about the Scott brothers for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
All proceeds to these recordings go towards my charity that lets people know how good Ridley Scott and Tony Scott are and were. Well, I'm starting one now.
There you
it's
go.
It's official. Rest in peace, of course, Tony Scott.
Mm.
Tragic loss to the directing
Industry.
community.
Hell yeah.
So, can I start with something?
Far away.
Every year that I revisit and watch new Ridley Scott films, no matter how good or bad they are, like House of Gucci, for example, or Goofy, my appreciation for him grows immensely.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very weirdly attached to him as a filmmaker, not because he's like a master, but because he's quite old now.
Yeah.
He still pumps it out like a young man.
Oh, don't say pumps it out like that, but
young,
good man, young virile Scott.
A young virile Scott pumping it hard and fast.
All right, this is gonna be a sacred podcast. You can't bring any of this today.
He's released so many movies
Mm-hmm.
that are so good and so influential, and yet I kind of think he's a little underrated in a weird way. How so? I don't really know, and I think it mostly stems from my feelings about Gladiator, in that, like, I think Gladiator is an amazing movie, and people, I mean, it's 22 years old at this point, 23.
Yeah.
And people are just kind of like, yeah, that was good. And it's like, no, it's really good. Yeah.
What movie do you think that is now over 20 years old still gets high praise? Are you thinking Lord of the Rings, like that fame doesn't die down and you want Gladiator to have that kind of respect?
Kinda, yeah.
Okay.
If you think about that time, like that movie doesn't get, and it's not, I'm not saying it's as good or better than some of these movies, but like I do think it is as good as some movies from that time that do get a lot of praise. And let's be fair, the early 2000s, besides like Lord of the Rings, and like they aren't really yet seen as a filmmaking time that people are like really nostalgic for, but hopefully they will be soon. But we talked about this a lot in the wake of The Northman, which I thought was good but not great. I was like, I don't know, this reminds me a lot of Gladiator, and Gladiator is just so good. And I really felt a lot of this when Ridley Scott released Gucci and Last Duel
And The Last Duel. Yeah.
in the same year.
Yes.
And I was like, we're so lucky to have such a talented filmmaker around. And we're lucky that someone like him, however you feel about those two movies, releases films at the clip and rate that he does and still makes really good movies.
I love The Last Duel.
I thought The Last Duel was quite good.
So fun and just excellent.
Gucci
I'm
was
glad
insane, but we did enjoy our time in the theater. Yeah.
It's no House of Gucci, I'll give it that. If The Last Duel had like a double role Jared Leto, maybe then it could have been improved vastly. But you know what? Gucci had to take it.
But we're not here to talk about all those movies. We're here to celebrate Ridley Scott and maybe one of his most underrated accomplishments, in my opinion.
100%. Kingdom of Heaven.
All right.
2005.
You got to freestyle on this for 20 straight minutes. Go.
The year is 1118 France. We are transported to 1118 France.
Are you trying to get
You know what? It's not 1118. It's 1184. Let's just say 20.
Are you trying to get into the plot like right away?
No, I'm setting the scene for like the mood. So I want you to imagine
we just did when
music.
we sang the song.
Okay. We can't.
Okay, I have some things I want to talk about before the plot.
Okay, yeah.
Firstly, is this the best director's cut ever? Now, people will already be scoffing because Ridley is famous for a lot of director's cuts. First and foremost, Blade Runner being cut about 45 times after it was made.
Sure.
But in terms of the reversal of reception for this film, and quite honestly, the complete quality reversal when you view the changes in this cut, and it's so incredible. Do you think, like, what do you think of that? I
have a lot to say about the theatrical cut versus the director's cut, but we have to only come to that once we're into the plot. So I don't want to give too much away right now, but my God, the movie just loses all that makes it great in the director's cut because you saw it in the theatrical version that is 45 minutes shorter than it needed to be. This movie needed to have been 4 hours long, or however long it is, 3.5. You know, and today if they made this movie, this could easily be like you said, like a 4-parter HBO miniseries. Just bang it out scene for scene, and it would have been so fulfilling. I think it lost out because it came out in 2005. This is pre Game of Thrones and pre all the Marvels and
pre-streaming.
Yeah, pre-streaming and to sit down and pay attention to this like epic masterpiece that I don't know. It didn't. The theatrical cut buried the movie.
I actually like movies. Sometimes lots of movies are too long. Let's put it that way. But I love it discovering a movie that you're like, this is really long, and you're like, it needs this. That is the mark of like true talent. Like, not many movies need to be the length they are, but there are a very few. I mean, we mentioned Titanic, Return of the King, this movie, The Irishman even. I'm like, it needs this treatment.
Yeah.
And I don't want it for every movie. Not every fucking John Wick 4 is supposed to be like 9 hours long, and I don't know if it needs that. But lots of movies, like I really love when it's like it needed all of this.
Yeah.
And I love that about this movie. And so speaking of like Lord of the Rings, I'm quite controversially, I don't like the extended editions of Lord of the Rings. I don't think they're necessary. Every scene that's extended, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get why you cut that. I totally get it.
Yeah.
The way that this movie, it completely changes like its tenor in the differences between the theatrical and director's cut. And I say that as a kind of uneducated because I haven't seen the theatrical cut since it came out, and I've only ever watched the director's cut since then.
Oh, I see.
You've actually watched the theatrical cut recently.
Very recently. Yeah. And I should preface this by saying I've never seen Kingdom of Heaven. Yeah. And so the first time that I watched this film is the director's cut. So having seen like what could have been and then ultimately watching the theatrical cut now, which is shorter, I'm glad I started with the big one first. And I know we're talking about movies that are director's cut that deserve to have been better. I cannot believe you didn't bring up Justice League. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, the Snyder Cut?
The Snyder Cut. No, we're not going to talk about it. Apocalypse Now. How do you feel about that
the
one?
Redux is
The
yeah.
Redux.
Um,
Did it warrant all the extra scenes?
yeah, I think so. I think it's the definitive version of that film. Although, like, again, it's the same with Blade Runner, because we're too young kind of to remember.
Yeah.
We never saw it in theaters,
No.
you know, and so it's hard to really. You know what's an interesting kind of negative example?
Mm-hmm.
Not the extended, but like the edited versions of the Star Wars films. Again, we didn't see them in theaters, but I have seen the original Star Wars films.
Right.
And seeing the like revamped versions,
Mm.
those ones still stand out in my mind as like, it's controversial to say, but the definitive versions of those films, because they came out right when I was young, and I still look at them and I'm like, oh yeah, that was added by George Lucas later, but I don't really care. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about these other directors, John.
Well, I'm ready to get into the plot
Damn right.
now. I'm going to test you here.
Go on.
You ruined it earlier and I cut it out of this podcast. How does this film begin?
This film begins with France. 1184.
I'm shaking my head. It doesn't.
12th century. Okay, it begins with the overture.
Yeah, hell yeah. It
Where?
does. It begins with the fucking overture. Thank you.
Excellent.
This overture, this music gets me amped for this movie. It
yeah.
is so good.
Before you guys even listen to this podcast, just go listen to the overture.
Well, you can't. It's not called the overture. If you go on a streaming service and you look for the Kingdom of Heaven soundtrack, the song playing is actually called Crusaders.
Whoa.
The music in this movie is sublime. And
Fantastic.
it's weirdly intrusive at times and imperfect and sometimes doesn't quite fit.
Yeah.
But overall, it's phenomenal.
I know why you're saying that sometimes it doesn't quite fit, because the tone of the movie is meant for you to be a part of the scene, and sometimes the music, for example, when they're trying to introduce, horses going through the desert, why is there loud music playing, you know? So it takes you out.
Here's the thing. So it's one of those scores that, like, it doesn't fit the movie perfectly, but independent of the film, it's amazing. And while there may be a tiny, tiny mismatch, it's still just like, this is like really good. Yeah. So the overture, like,
what is it, like 10 minutes? I don't know.
It's like 3 minutes.
It sure feels like it could have been.
It gets me fucking lifted for this movie. Like, seriously. Yeah. And then we open on France. Talk about, it's 18, I don't know, it's
1184, yeah. 12th century France. The scene is not a graveyard, really, but just
crossroads.
It's the crossroads,
yeah,
where you see a giant cross.
Yes, stone cross,
and then 3 men are digging a grave,
burying a woman. This opening is super evocative.
Yes,
I think it's really cool. Like the way that there's like this snow, which is all fake. Oh yeah, I listened to the whole commentary, so I have some little tidbits about that. But
tell me.
Well, the snow is all fake in this whole sequence. Basically, the whole opening 20 minutes is all fake snow. But like the 3 men are burying this woman, and she's in a shroud, and then the wind blows the thing off of her face. It's so good, like so good. And then just that one guy who's just chatting. It's such a really interesting opening.
It's very Game of Thrones-esque in that opening already.
Just the look of it is so good.
It feels like the pilot where you kind of see these men huddled around figuring out how to bury this lady. And one of those men is Martin Sheen.
Wrong.
What?
Michael Sheen.
Oh, God damn it.
But Martin Sheen would be pretty sick in this film.
As I was saying it, now I picture him. Damn it. Yes, Michael Sheen.
So, yeah, Michael Sheen in this. Michael Sheen is a wonderful actor who takes roles that I hate all the time and does lots of things that.
Good Omens.
Yeah, he does these like very goofy very flamboyant roles that I just drive me insane. He's way better when he's not.
Yeah.
When he's subdued and reined in a little bit, because he's such a good actor.
Yeah.
And in this, he's incredible. Anyway, he basically, at this point, he says the woman committed suicide, cut off her head. Not to mention, they're passed by crusaders, including Liam Neeson and David Thewlis, coming to look for someone in the village. A blacksmith.
Before they even get to the part where these crusaders come in, right? And the three men are still figuring out how to bury this lady, Michael Sheen? Yeah, I got it this time. Michael Sheen says cut off her head because she tried to commit suicide. And later it's revealed that or maybe immediately it's revealed that this is a person Michael Sheen knows. The lady.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of.
So it's not just a rogue body. It's not their job to do it. He's a priest. But he is
not a cool priest.
Not a cool priest at all.
And then essentially, so the crusaders come through, and then we cut to Orlando Bloom in a jail, having been arrested for something, but he's been told to be released because he needs to help build a church because he's a blacksmith.
That's right.
A really talented blacksmith, actually. This is something that William Monahan, the writer, who wins an Academy Award the year after for a little film called The Departed.
Ooh.
He said in the commentary was that a lot of stuff that's stripped out of the theatrical cut kind of undercuts Orlando Bloom's role and makes him seem a little unrealistic. But the director's cut leaves a lot of stuff in where it's like you find out how smart and talented and capable he is. You find out things like he's been to war. He's built war machines. He's fought in battles and stuff like that. Because I believe in the theatrical cut, they don't reveal a lot of that. So you're just like, how did this fucking guy become the defender of Jerusalem? And then you kind of, in this, you're like, oh, he's really smart.
Yeah.
The thing that Monahan keeps saying in the commentary is he's like a provincial Da Vinci.
Yeah.
You know, so he's an extra talented person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And see, I didn't pick up on any of that. Not even in the way that they kind of showcase him being this talented blacksmith or being this talented. It's
very subtle. Like it is subtle, and the Crusaders go to this castle, and they're having dinner, and you know, someone comments on the cup, right? And the king, the Lord, says that he's like got this guy who's an artificer who's like.
Oh,
top
that's what
G.
Oh,
yeah.
God,
Talking
I
about
gotta
Orlando
go
Bloom.
watch it again.
And Neeson knows that Orlando Bloom is likely his son.
Right.
At this point.
Yeah.
So the Crusaders, they come looking for him, and then the next scene essentially is Orlando Bloom does a bunch of blacksmithery. He like doesn't talk for the first like 15 minutes of this movie. We find out Michael Sheen, the priest, is his brother.
Yeah.
And he brings the Crusaders to go find Bloom.
Yeah.
And basically Sheen's goal is to send Bloom away from the village so the church, quote unquote, can repossess Bloom's property and
give it to the
priest. Give it to Michael Sheen.
Yeah.
He's a really fucking bad guy.
Yeah.
Bloom, in true protagonist fashion, refuses. Liam Neeson and the lads all fuck off. And then Sheen comes in the night and encourages him to leave again by insulting his wife. And Bloom stabs him and lights him on fire.
See, all of this context is missing from the theatrical cut in terms of what is the relationship between the priest and Orlando Bloom.
Yeah, you don't know he's his brother.
No.
You just think he's a dick.
He's just an asshole, but turns out in the director's cut you find out, oh, they're half brothers. And the priest ended up chopping Orlando Bloom's dead wife's head before he buried her.
He says to him originally, he tells Bloom that he didn't do it. And then he tells him later that he cut off her head.
Yeah.
It's really dark. It's like, yeah. And so there's another thing too, sorry. There's a scene, really beautiful scene, we'll come back to later. But when Bloom is released from prison, he takes a crib and he sets it on fire in his forge. So what happened was his wife miscarried or lost their baby and committed suicide. That's basically what happened. That's the background you're supposed to get. And the cool thing about it is like it's very, again, kind of subtle and not totally expounded upon clearly. It's all in symbol and it's all in action. And again, this opening scene needs to be longer. Like, I don't know how the theatrical cut does it,
So
but it
short.
needs all of this time. To lay
The
it in.
theatrical cut, like it's just sped up 10x. There's no context setting for why Orlando is so incensed when he meets his stepbrother. Why does he randomly stick a burning sword through his gut to kill him? Because for most of the scenes, Orlando Bloom doesn't speak. He's just this quiet, sad boy character. And then ultimately he has this like rage where soon after Liam Neeson comes and reverse takens him to Jerusalem.
And another thing too is that Neeson comes to him, and I really love this detail, but Neeson basically says, he's like, yeah, so like long ago I fucked your mom. Like it's
In
like
so many
not
words,
it's
yeah.
not like there's nothing like very romantic about it. Like he says he didn't assault her, but he was like I didn't force her, but we did have sex and you're my son, basically. And then Orlando Bloom's murdered his brother, Michael Sheen, and he rides off to find his daddy-o.
That's right.
And we're fucking on the way to adventure, baby.
Immediately, a sick forest fight scene erupts.
Well, Neeson tries to train him with sword fighting, which
Beautiful scene.
Orlando Bloom's not bad at.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like, this isn't his first sword fight, which is lost in the theatrical cut. It seems like he's never fought before in his life, but it turns out he has. And then Jaime Lannister comes to find them. And there's this interesting thing that I found. So there's one of the squire with the Crusaders.
Mm-hmm.
He's like finding a place to take a dump, and he's sitting against this tree.
Mm-hmm.
And Jaime Lannister's dude shoots him with a crossbow.
Yeah.
Right? And then Lannister goes to find Orlando Bloom, saying like, oh, he's murdered this guy. And he is it's interesting because he's like, we'll take him because he has to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was clear they were going to kill them all along.
Yes.
Like, regardless of whether Bloom came willingly or not. And I think like Neeson knows that.
Yeah.
And that's why they fight and almost everybody dies.
Correct. And the way they do it too is fantastic, because there's like a diplomatic exchange before any of this happens. It is revealed a little bit that Nicholas Coster-Waldau's character, Jaime Lannister, is the nephew of Liam Neeson.
Yes.
And then so he says
the Lord that they had dinner with.
That's right.
Is Neeson's brother.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not shown in the theatrical cut.
No.
Yeah.
So because we're watching the director's cut, we're revealed that, so there is a relationship between this guy who's come to kill Liam Neeson, take away Orlando Bloom, and it erupts into this fantastic fight.
It's like an intense
sick
fight.
Scene.
Also, like a total undercut of the expectations of the film.
Yeah.
You think that you're like, we're going to follow this gang,
Mm-hmm.
and then almost all of them get killed.
Yeah.
Neeson gets shot with an arrow in the armpit.
Survives.
Survives, but not for long.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler. We're going to get to it. Thulis survives.
Yeah.
So there's this interesting thing that Ridley says in the director's cut, which I actually never caught on.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you caught it at all. You've confessed your creepiness with David Thewlis.
Yeah, he's so creepy.
And I've confessed about how much I love him as an actor.
Yeah.
Thewlis is really good in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
and he's deliberately meant to portray like an angel. That's
Really?
the entire idea behind his character. He's like a guardian angel for Orlando Bloom from basically this point forward. You know the way he touches his head when he rides past with the sword?
Uh-huh.
That's the symbolic thing behind him.
Oh, I thought it was just a quick knighting. Chook, you're a knight, go
But
fight.
He constantly is like showing up and giving Orlando Bloom pretty sage advice, especially after Neeson's character dies. You know,
I didn't pick up on that vibe at all.
I never picked up on it either. But
And
now
as-
that they say it, I'm like, I get that.
I don't. I still don't
Really?
agree with that at all. I think it's because he's so creepy and just there in his presence, not really adding much to the scene, but just being like this philosopher guy who kind of says things that are kind of shady.
Hold on, though.
Hmm.
There's a scene later which is really great between Thewlis and Bloom.
Yeah.
And we can talk about it right now. Let's talk about one of the big themes of this movie.
Right.
It has a very dim view of religion.
Correct.
I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But it does not have a dim view of humanity. I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene. So when Orlando Bloom is in Jerusalem, after he's basically taking control of Ibelin, and Thulis arrives because he came later to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And he says, like, how do you find it here? And Orlando Bloom says, God doesn't speak to me. And Thulis says, I don't put any stock in religion.
Mm-hmm.
What is like godly is right action and helping people who can't help themselves. And then he says, Jerusalem isn't with God.
Mm-hmm.
Jerusalem is here in your head and here in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the theme of the film, basically.
Yeah.
Like, it's really beautiful. Like,
Yeah.
Monahan again says that. He says the same thing in the commentary. He's like, lots of people ask if this movie, which we're going to talk about later, but he's like, was this movie influenced by, for example, the Iraq War?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, no, this movie is about right action.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And I was like, that's such a succinct way of putting it, and it's really interesting.
Well, all of it is, well, not all of it, but most of it is based on occurrences, right? The main character, who later is revealed as Saladin, who's this like Muslim ruler of then Jerusalem who comes to fight, was a real person. All the Crusaders and the war with the Templars and all of that is still a real. So I don't know if the current modern connections to Iraq War or anything that is a fallout of like religious conflict has to be, I guess it is related to it, but I don't know if that was the original intention for Mr. Scott there.
I don't know. We're going to talk. I want to talk about
Let's
that
find out, though.
a
You
little
know what?
later
Yeah.
because I have some other thoughts
There are
on
parallels.
The big theme that I think about in this film a lot
Mm-hmm.
is God's will, which is
Mm-hmm.
enacted a lot in the film in both sarcastic and sincere ways.
Yeah.
And just like Thulis says when he says, take a ship to the promised land, and if you survive, if God has use for you there, you'll survive. And if not, God be with you. And I find it really interesting because there's all these occurrences, like you said, there's all these seemingly random occurrences.
Mm-hmm.
Not random, but like they're read as the will of God.
Yeah.
And as we find out, Orlando Bloom is a pragmatist and a humanist and likely an atheist, you know.
Or a pacifist at the very least, because he doesn't understand why there needs to be conflict all the time. Or maybe it's Ridley Scott's take on the whole situation in Jerusalem is that he wants to kind of introduce Orlando Bloom's character as the audience themselves.
Bloom's a bit of a Jedi Knight in this.
Yeah.
In that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's we're gonna talk we're gonna talk more about the movie because there's only 4 hours to go.
Let's get him. Are we entering Jerusalem?
No.
Not
No.
yet.
So Neeson's injured in this fight. They head off to Messina in Italy to take the ships down to the Holy Land.
Yeah.
Neeson is clearly dying.
Mm-hmm.
There's an arrow in him, which he breaks off. And so their arrowhead is stuck between his ribs. And as Thulis says to him, either a cyst will form or marrow will seep into your blood and you'll die.
Yeah.
And that's God's will.
Right.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Neeson's clearly dying. They head off to Messina. They meet Guy de Lusignan, who is just a fucking prick.
Mr. Guy.
Big fucking Guy. Fucking guy. Martin Sokus, the New Zealand actor, he plays Celeborn in Return of the King.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like such a twat of a fucking guy.
He's such a caricature of an evil guy in the movie. I think he's the one person who takes it out for me.
He's not his villainy might be the weakest part of the film.
I agree.
He's a little over the top, his performance.
Yeah.
And but honestly, it works, I think, because this movie isn't about defeating villainy.
No.
It's about something else. But because it's a film, you kind of need a villain to really do it.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, so me and you have talked about before, like we've mentioned briefly, I don't know if it's made it into many podcasts, but like we mentioned briefly, like the idea of like the protagonist and the antagonist. And do you know like the formal definition of an antagonist, basically?
No. What do you mean?
It's the person who makes the protagonist change. Protagonists, by definition, are people who change.
Really? I
Yes.
just thought it was villain.
No.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
So, and complex stories and well-written and interesting stories sometimes, they're not that simple to really just be like, he's the main character, therefore the protagonist. He's the person he has to kill at the end, therefore the antagonist. That's not always clear. You know what I mean?
Very cool.
So, Guy de Lusignan doesn't really antagonize, quote unquote, Orlando Bloom because he never makes Orlando Bloom really change from the humanist person that Orlando Bloom's character is. He is a villain in that way.
Yeah.
But he's not as fleshed out, in my opinion.
He's just a little jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, and the movie is complex in that way, in that it's like, well, lots of people make Orlando Bloom's character change the way he is. Sibylla, Baldwin, Tiberius, David Thewlis, Liam Neeson, they all do, right? But they're not quite antagonists either. It's many different things. So I don't know.
Very cool.
Yeah.
But I think, you know what? Now that you mention it, that makes me feel even more sad for Orlando Bloom's character, and also for Orlando Bloom, the actor, because then I feel like why a big part of why this movie fell flat is because Bloom does little to nothing to add to it. Everybody else is such a powerhouse performance. Everybody else is almost always in the limelight, even when Orlando Bloom is standing next to them. And he's meant to be the protagonist, like you said. So between, Brendan Gleeson's character, between Liam Neeson, between the lady Sibylla, who we'll talk about shortly, where is our guy Bloom? Forgettable.
Do you still think that now that you've watched the
100%.
movie?
More so now.
I have changed my view of Orlando Bloom's character. I quite like him in this film. And I will say, too, you could argue that Sibylla is also a protagonist in this film.
Yes.
Although she comes in much later, her story is one of the more interesting parts of this movie.
Yes.
And, well, you could make a movie totally based around her.
Yeah. And
her journey in this film.
I agree.
And I think it's really interesting, but there's so much going on in this movie, sometimes it gets a little lost. But her journey might be interesting. And you're taking a big breath like you want to talk, but I have something really important to say that I was going to say later.
Yeah.
To me, what's so striking and touching about this movie, think of it from Orlando Bloom's perspective, is that it's a movie about forgiveness and redemption and how one builds a life when everything is taken away from them. Orlando Bloom starts with nothing, right? And it's about how he comes to Jerusalem to seek forgiveness from God. There is no God. And so what can he do to seek forgiveness within himself, really, and redemption for the actions of him, the actions of his wife, things like that. And how do you make this life? Like, obviously, he's pretty lucky that his dad's like, well, I have a huge fucking house and property in Jerusalem if you want to rebuild your life. Like, pretty cool.
I'm number one crusader. I got you.
It is about that, like, redeeming after all of this loss, right? And the thing I think is so cool is that Orlando Bloom comes to Jerusalem with nothing, just a promise of a new life. And he encounters Sibylla, who has everything. And over the course of the film, Sibylla loses everything.
Yeah.
And at the end of the film, they've flipped places completely. And when they're back in France, Sibylla is starting the journey that Orlando Bloom has started at the beginning of this movie. And it's this beautiful cycle. Like, I love that about this film.
Yeah.
That's what's so cool about it. Yeah.
I'm just saying him as an actor is forgettable. If they could have put anybody but Orlando Bloom, it would have, all of what you said would have been showcased in a much better way. If they had friggin', I don't know, Johnny Depp, for
Mike
instance. We can't. No. I'm going to go back to say Johnny Depp, because I think his presence alone is such a solid one. Like, he looks like the part of, the savior who doesn't quite know it. The humble guy who becomes
Johnny Depp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a role like this, in a role of 12th century French guy just wandering through You know,
but you know, like if Johnny Depp was in this movie, he'd be like, "Hey, can I wear this crazy hat?"
I have an opium addiction.
then-
I don't know how to get past it.
Ridley would be like, "Take off the hat, Johnny," and he'd be like,
But my
"No,
opium.
I really think this crazy hat really adds to my character. I'm gonna keep the hat, Ridley."
No, I
think here's my thing. I was gonna talk about this later, but we can talk about it now. I think Orlando Bloom gets better as the film goes on. I think later when he's like truly a fully formed knight is when it starts to pick up the last hour. And that's the part when he is the more active character.
Mhm.
But you're right that he is overshadowed by, a
Everyone.
fucking amazing cast. Can you think, Liam Neeson, Jeremy Irons, David Thewlis,
no,
and fucking Ed Norton are all around this dude. Not to mention fucking Brendan Gleeson,
Mm-hmm.
and like they're all performing at like the top of their game. You know, he's like surrounded by these like real heavy hitters, and he kind of is like the rookie on the team.
Yeah,
Even though he's been in one of the biggest franchises ever at this point. Not to mention he was working alongside Brad Pitt and Troy and things like that. Like,
yeah.
I see where you're coming from.
Which is why this is such a failure on Ridley Scott's part. This is what might have killed the movie is Orlando Bloom. Anybody, if you could have had Russell Crowe in his place, muted as an actor, but still be such a presence that you want to rally behind someone who's this leading man. I just don't see myself feeling that way about Orlando Bloom, regardless of whether or not he gets 2 extra lines of dialogue later in the film. The only time that Orlando Bloom makes this rousing speech, which is fantastically written, and I'll get into it after as we progress through the plot, but like that scene is maybe 2 minutes, but the rest of the movie is like 4 hours. So we're all just waiting on this guy to show up, who kind of never does.
That's so funny. I kind of I disagree, not because I think Orlando Bloom is incredible in this, but maybe I'm just biased, and I felt the more I've watched this movie, I feel so much more charitable towards Bloom because he was criticized in this role. He wasn't panned, but people were just kind of like, he was a little bit of nothing. Like you say, you're not alone in feeling that way. The more I've thought about this movie, I'm just like, I feel so charitable towards his performance because he's got it tough, and the movie around him is already so good that it does kind of elevate his performance in a way. So that's how I feel about it.
It's also one of the best things I've seen him in. Orlando Bloom's
it might be
other
his
works,
best role.
100%.
Yeah.
Like I'm glad he did it for himself, but it's just not for me.
You know what? So he is on the director's commentary as well, and obviously he's dedicated to his craft, and he's very thoughtful. And whatever you think of him as a performer, the other thing I think people think about it more now, but it's a little underrated, is the physical aspects of this role are intense. And he's really good at that.
Yeah.
He said the scene where the cavalry charge.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm pretty good on a horse, and this was really hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, because he's done a lot of that shit. Like, he's a very talented physical actor, I think.
Yeah, you Legolas the shit out of that scene. It was great.
But even the scene where he gets attacked by those 2 knights, like just the way his body movement and stuff, where you're just like, yeah, I'd be fucking tired too, man. Holy shit. And like, so I think people give that more credence today. Speaking of, I mentioned John Wick earlier. Like, people are impressed with the things that Keanu or the stunt team behind those movies can do. And when you look at these old films, I think it's kind of like, yeah, you got to give them credit, because a lot of that stuff too is like in-camera work that they got to do. Yeah,
100%. Can you imagine if Keanu Reeves took the spot of Orlando Bloom, but it's like young Keanu? No, again, also forgettable. I don't know why they cast a very soft leading male to show that, but he's a, austere, boy.
He's one of the biggest stars in the world at that point, though.
I know, but just as a leading man in a film that is so blockbuster, epic, 4-hour war saga, and then you just cast just Mr. No Facial Hair? Come on. It just doesn't.
Fake beard, too.
Fake beard too. God damn.
Hey, I gotta say though, that episode in Easy where he tries to have a threesome with Kate McCucci, he's so fucking charming in that. He's really wonderful. Okay, we gotta get back to the plot. We've diverged on Bloom. Okay,
Bloom.
Shipwreck.
Yes, but before that, Bloom gets knighted.
Great scene, yeah.
Great scene
Right.
where Liam Neeson is just about to call it quits. He's about to die, and he picks up a sword and he places it on Orlando Bloom's head and says, protect the king of Jerusalem, and if the king were to die, protect the people.
Serve the king of Jerusalem.
Serve the king.
And if the king dies, protect the people.
Serve the king.
Interesting how this happens. And they're in a chapel and they're surrounded by holy men.
Mm-hmm.
And he says nothing about God.
No. Because
Really,
that is the
'cause-
moral takeaway from this entire film, is that God is in your head and heart, but really because of whatever maxims are set within the Crusaders in their philosophy versus the Templar philosophy versus, Muslims, or however they see it, it's all about the people and not really so much about religion itself.
Yeah. There's a lot of thematic stuff about religion masking the true intentions of man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with Neeson and Thulis, and later you find with Tiberius, Jeremy Irons, that they don't really believe in that. They believe in right action.
Actions of
goodness.
man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Neeson dies.
And then Bloom hops on a ship and is setting sail to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And my God, what a ship ride.
You know what's cool about that sequence, with
What?
which I didn't know? Orlando Bloom says in the commentary, the sequence of the shipwreck, like the actual shipwreck in the sea and stuff.
Yeah.
He was like, when I watched this movie, I didn't realize this was in the film. I was like, what? That's weird. And he's like, so I think Ridley took these scenes from the siege later, changed the color and stuff, and then took scenes from his film White Squall and created this CGI shipwreck sequence that I didn't realize I was in. And I was like, that's so cool. And then Ridley says, he's like, you could have cut from Messina straight to the beach with all the wrecked ships. But he was like, but I thought I could do this for like very cheaply. I could make this short sequence.
Very
and I was
cool.
like, we're blessed, man.
Good.
The guy is talented.
Good direction, Mr. Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
of course, the ship crashes, but Bloom is the lone survivor because God has purpose for
God's
him.
will.
God's will.
And
And Bloom ends up on a desert where he meets Jafar from Aladdin. And he
Hold on, we have to shout out Alexander Siddig is the actor's name.
Right.
He is fucking great in this film.
Excellent.
He's so good.
Is it the guy who he fights in the desert?
Well, the guy who's faking being the guy who said I'm that guy's servant, but he's not. Yeah.
Got it. So he fights a guy, he kills the guy, and then there's another guy with him.
He fights the guy over his own horse.
Yeah. You idiot.
The guy's like, that's my horse now.
Yeah. It was very
Yeah. There is there is one little thing here in Orlando Bloom's performance that I really love. When the guy's like, he says that's his horse, it's on his land, and then he says, how can it be his horse? And then the guy's like, he said he'll take the horse, and then Bloom just stands up and he's so tired and he's just like, no.
Yeah, a lot of Bloom's dialogues even later on in the film are very monosyllabic.
Yes
And no.
Yeah.
But yeah, then so he obviously, it's a showmanship of his skill, and the second man on the horse is like, I was just his servant, don't mind me, let me take you into Jerusalem. And
Orlando Bloom tells him to take him to Jerusalem.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. And that's where we as an audience, and I thought this was a really, really clever way to introduce us to Jerusalem, because we don't know anything about the Holy Land, neither does Balian, Orlando Bloom's character, and so we enter with him as an outsider, and this guy, Orlando Bloom, becomes my window into Jerusalem, which I thought was a really cool introduction to this brand new world outside of where he's come from.
Completely different.
Fantastically done. That scene is now suddenly we have background music, which is a little bit Lawrence of Arabia.
Beautiful. I love this sequence. Yeah.
Just chef kiss. Yeah. And all of that is just so well done.
There's this interesting thing they were talking about in the commentary about how, so Bloom takes Siddig's character and then says like, dude, take the horse and fuck off. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And Siddig says to him, your quality will be known by your enemies before you meet them, which is important. Balian ends up wandering about Jerusalem, and then he's encountered by Elmark, who is one of Ibelin's servants, essentially. And they recognize him from his sword, which is Liam Neeson's previous old sword. And then they take him to like his house. And there's this whole sequence of him being like bathed and washed and served upon by these
hotties.
These hotties, yeah. But I found this really interesting. They talked about how it was like, well, if you're from France and it's shitty and cold and miserable, and you go to the Middle East where it's hot and people are clean and there's lots of hygiene and it's different, is like, it's no wonder why people went there. You know, it was a bit like the Wild Wild West, where you could, not the film, not the great Will Smith film, but like it's a little bit like the Wild West, where you can make your way and fortune in a place that's comfortable, warm, and people practice hygiene. There's fruit there, you know, when you'd be like scrabbling in the dirt in France, and the scene where he gets washed and then he's like, God, these ladies are touching me. It's weird. Like Ridley says, he's like, well, he wouldn't have had as much experience with hygiene as they do there, because he's like, in Northern Europe, it's so fucking cold all the time and no way to heat yourself that you might only wash like once a week, because it's such a miserable experience to soak yourself in cold water.
I didn't think of that.
And I never thought of that. I thought it was a really interesting idea.
Nice.
Whereas like in the desert, it's like nice and it's
you gotta clean up.
Probably smells good too. Yeah.
Oh,
and then he meets Sibylla.
Hottie number one.
Number
Jerusalem's
one
hottie.
Hottest.
Yeah. Eva Green, baby.
And gotta say about Eva Green is really good in this movie. The costuming for her character is unbelievable. Excellent. It's some of the best like single character shit in any movie ever. It's so amazing.
Sick turban.
Really underrated
situation. Very nice.
He gives her some water. That's very sexy. They make eye contact. They're definitely going to get at it. They're definitely going to get to it. She's, And
so this character, have they already introduced who she is?
No, he doesn't know who she is.
Okay.
She comes to the house and wants to talk to the Baron of Ibeline. And she doesn't know who he is. And she says, tell the Baron that Sibylla calls. And he doesn't know who Sibylla is, basically.
Right.
But she doesn't realize she's talking to the Baron.
That's right.
And then Thulis arrives. He talks to... Oh, we forgot one thing. Sorry. Orlando Bloom goes to Golgotha to beg forgiveness from God. And he buries his wife's necklace there.
Oh, yeah. Because he's obviously forgotten about his sweet dead lady wife now that he's
but
in the
that's a really... That was a scene that like struck me about...
Yeah.
You know, this scene where... Because he sits on Golgotha like all night kind of. And it's just like... He literally has nothing. Like, he doesn't know what he really has, you know? And this is him restarting his life, like pressing the reset button on his life. He's said goodbye to his wife. He's begged forgiveness from God. God hasn't spoken to him, so he has nothing. Then it turns out he has a sick house in the middle of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And another sick house in the outskirts.
What's up?
Anyway, and then Thulis arrives. He says the thing, serve the people, right action, thing we've been over before. And then, so while he's in Jerusalem... This is when he finds out that Sibylla is married to Guy, the total cunt of a husband. He was just still just a total dick. It's a marriage of convenience. Sibylla is not so happy with him. And can you blame her? Like, Jesus, this fucking guy. He's such a whiny little crap face.
She's got a little...
He like sits down at the table and sees Orlando Bloom and he's like, I cannot eat here. Get this man away.
And then he just gets up to leave and Sibylla doesn't have any reaction on her face. So he makes a jab at her and be like, oh, my wife never complains when I leave. That is either the best of wives or the worst of wives.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And it's great. It's such a great line. And of course, as soon as he leaves...
Sibylla's like, oh, it's a weight off my chest. Jesus.
But Jeremy Irons, the sweet old grandpa he is, turns to her and says, to the best of wives. And they toast. And it's great.
You know why? Jeremy Irons fucks in this movie. He's so good.
Yeah.
He is. Oh, man. He's great. He's such like he is so kind of like just tired ass Jeremy Irons doing his best. Yeah. Plays a character named Tiberius, who is actually based on a real character, but his real name was too complicated. So they made it something very, you know, his name was the same as some other character, and they had to change his name. Yeah, but he's a real character from history. And then Orlando Bloom meets the king, Baldwin.
King of Jerusalem.
Yeah, Baldwin the Fourth.
The leper king of Jerusalem,
Dope
whose
mask.
face is always covered in a mask. And till the end of the film, we never get to see who it is. And John and I were I was trying to guess back and forth, who the hell is this guy? Because they never reveal the face. And there's this like somewhat mysterious mixed accent, and you can't make out immediately who it is. But once you realize that it's Edward Norton, it is hard to unhear it, and it is fantastic. I think it's one of the best things he's done. Never shows his face in the entire film, obviously because he has leprosy. And King of Jerusalem, what a pimp.
I believe he was super enthusiastic about doing it too for that reason.
Nice.
And so I was thinking about this movie. So one of the reasons I think that Ridley did a director's cut, not to mention the fact that he's just like, well, fuck, I like doing director's cuts and I want to do a better movie. I do think he did it the thing is this, the Roadshow edition, he screened at a theater. Like, he did screen it. And I think part of it was to possibly get nominated for an Academy Award. This movie was never nominated. I think it could have been nominated in many categories.
Yeah.
As had costuming, score, lots of technical stuff. I also think maybe the only major nomination it could have garnered was Norton for Best Supporting Actor. Could have really been that. It would have been a really brave kind of nomination because it would be really rare to have a character whose face is basically hidden the entire time. But he's really good in this movie, and it's a really effective role. Yeah. I honestly too, I'm so partial to this film, but I really think William Monahan should have been nominated for Best Original Screenplay.
Oh yeah, come on.
Once you see the director's cut, you're just like, this is such an incredible piece.
It's
of
a robbery.
writing.
I feel it. Yeah.
Some of the scenes are so beautifully written, and just so you can watch it as a single scene and just be like, this is so interesting. Not the one with Thulis where he says like Jerusalem's in your head and in your heart, and then the one when Bloom meets Baldwin and they play chess.
Yeah.
It's just such a lovely, just beautiful little dialogue bits. I don't know. Something about her is so lovely. Yeah.
And I'm glad they take their time to set that scene. And it's not like typical dialogue scene where there's an exchange of back and forth and then it just cut to 30 seconds later, they move on. This movie takes its time, and there is not a moment lost where you're like, maybe that should have been cut out. No. Everything feels relevant and important to the following scene.
The chess scene was cut down in the theatrical version, I believe. Yeah. And that's one of the issues. And I think the thing that was cut is the scene where Baldwin asks Bloom, he's like, what do you think of this wall? And Bloom is like, well, you could fix these things about it. Again, showing that this guy is very smart.
Strategic,
he's an engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so later when you find out when he's defending Jerusalem, you're like, he has a lot of familiarity with what's happening here because he's been working on it. This has been his fucking side hustle, has been defending Jerusalem.
Architect, blacksmith.
Yeah.
Sweet boy.
And it was another thing. So moving on from there, he inherits Ibeline on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Yeah. Where he watches over this road, this pilgrim road, basically. And he kicks that fucking shit into shape. He digs a well.
Gets water in there.
Another criticism of the film was like, oh, so people in the Middle East never thought that they needed water, but it was like, no, actually he's not digging just a well. He's making a whole irrigation system, which is really complex. Yeah. And that's kind of what you see in this very extended sequence where he whips this place into shape, and the little cherry on top is he gets to fuck Eva Green. They like immediately start a torrid affair. She just like shows up and she's like, well, I'm staying here this weekend. Like, what's up?
Excellent.
And she's this whole sequence with her, she's so great. Yeah. The scene where she has the candle they're talking in the hall, and she says something about like there is a light between them, and then she blows it out, and that's when they start hooking up. Yeah, that's a really cool scene. Yeah,
cool is the word for it.
Cool is the word for it. I think I thought it was like really inventive and
it was
interesting, and she's so,
and it's such a breath of fresh air because of all the chaos and movement and all that you're seeing, and now it's like this quiet moment,
Yeah.
and it's done so beautifully.
She's really good in this movie, man.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that she's the only woman character in this film.
Yes.
That's another criticism
Who shows
that
her face.
could be leveled.
Yeah.
She's the only one who has a line of dialogue.
Yeah.
I swear to God.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It definitely doesn't pass the Bechdel test.
No.
Yeah.
Even every scene she's in, she's either talking about her brother, the king of Jerusalem, or her husband, Guy, the guy of Jerusalem. What is he? He's like a knight.
Jerusalem's
Is
biggest
the
dick.
mayor of Jerusalem, and then, or, which is later revealed, her son.
Her son. From another, not Guy's son, from another marriage.
Mhm.
I will say that despite all of that, I do think she's a well-written character, and she goes through, as I said, a major arc. She is like the secondary protagonist of this film, essentially.
If Orlando Bloom was entirely removed from this movie and was just some guy who did his part and ended up coming to Jerusalem, that is where the movie starts for me, is once I meet Sibylla, I'm like, tell me more about this lady.
Yeah.
And she could easily have been the protagonist, like you said. She could have led the film to the end of it.
I think that's one of the reasons, though, is that she takes the reins of the film in lots of ways.
Yeah.
And she shares it with Orlando Bloom.
Mhm.
It starts, the first third of the film is very much like, this is Orlando Bloom's story. And then all of a sudden, it's like you have protagonist 1A and 1B.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is not in the theatrical cut. A lot of that is because of the director's cut. It adds about a lot of her story back in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they start a torrid affair, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. This is where the movie, this is kind of like where the movie's second act starts in a
Picks
weird
up.
way, even
Yeah.
though you could argue it's much like, I don't know, but it starts to pick up because that's when,
It lays the seeds of conflict.
of everything.
Everything.
The Templars kill a bunch of Muslims,
Mhm.
and that's not cool because they're not supposed to do that. I mean, there's peace between Christians and Muslims at this point,
Yeah.
and the Templars are like, no, we like war. It's
Not in
God's
our-
will.
Yeah.
And Brendan Gleeson is just mental.
And you know what? This question about like the Templars versus the Muslims, and then the Crusaders, and Christianity and Islam, all of this, and I know we're saying all of these very heavy religious words, but throughout it, the theme of the film, which we talked about early on, is what does it mean to be moral? What does it mean to do the right thing? Ridley Scott does such a fucking great job of differentiating the good guy from the bad guy in a restrained way. So when he talks about Templars versus Crusaders, Templars are obviously like the warriors, right? They are financially motivated. They want to do what they do to protect the city, first of all. Crusaders are like the pilgrims who are religiously motivated and want to protect the people. Both are Christians. And then Muslims are shown as people who want to come in and take over Jerusalem because they claim the right over that place.
The Holy Land.
The Holy Land.
Yeah.
So, but and some of the criticism I read online was like, oh, I don't know, are we glorifying the act of Christianity? But no, we're not. I 100% don't agree with that at all. I don't think there's any glorifying of Crusaders at all. If anything, Templars are the bad guys, very clearly.
If anything, the Muslims are the
most reasonable,
positive light. Yeah.
100%. And I want to talk about it more when we get into Saladin. But
so, sorry.
No. I just want to say that he gets such a clear picture, such a non-Hollywood take on Islam for once, that it's so fucking refreshing. And it is so hard to do post 9/11.
Well, I think that one of the things is that if you painted the Muslims in a bad light, there would be like big accusations of Islamophobia.
Totally.
Islamophobia, not anti-Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Islamophobia, which was, we talked about this in Jared. We didn't talk about Islamophobia, but we talked about the climate at the time.
Yeah.
Fucking rampant.
Yeah.
It was fucking rampant at the time. And I want to talk about it a little bit later too, but the thing I love about this movie as a non-religious person is it does not pull its punches about Christianity.
No.
And it doesn't pull its punches necessarily. Christianity just happens to be the religion, but Bloom's character is constantly pulled into things being like, well, God wills it, so why don't you do this totally politically motivated thing? He's like, and he says no all the time, even when it would benefit him greatly.
Yes.
There's a point, it's fucking like, this is like the nail in that coffin.
Mm-hmm.
When they're about to defend Jerusalem, when Saladin is about to march on Jerusalem,
yes,
the fucking bishop guy is like, well, why don't we just leave? And Orlando Bloom's like, no, we have to defend Jerusalem. And he's like, what about the people? And the Pope guy is like, I don't know. Well, if God wants something from him, he won't let them die. It's like, what do you mean? And like Bloom is so just like, oh, this fucking guy. And
he's the asshole victim.
They're serious assholes in this fucking movie. And they always couch it in God's will.
Yeah.
When before Baldwin decides to march on Carrick,
mm-hmm.
the Templars are fighting with Tiberius's blue-robed gang, right? And that one guy says, he's like, if war is necessary, it's the will of God.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you guys just murdered a bunch of fucking Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just like, well, if God wants war, war is necessary. And it's like, no, you did this. And
of course.
It's always this like, it's so annoying. And it's always
man's
this, like,
will.
And the thing the reason I'm so impassioned about this right now is it's not unlike real life right now. It's not unlike what we see in lots of places at the moment right now.
Of course.
I won't mention them, but big countries to the south of the country I live in are a lot like this. And it's ridiculous.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Well, there's a reason.
And they've moved on from fucking Muslims to trans people, LGBTQ plus people, and women. And it's ridiculous. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh my God. I love this movie. I know we got to get this plot going along because I got to get into some big themes.
Okay. So they murder the Muslims. Mm-hmm. Basically, Saladin is like, I'm going to go fucking take Brendan Gleeson's head off, and I'm going to go march on Carrick. Carrick is outside of Jerusalem. It's a massive fortress. It's still alive today.
Sick.
And it's a really hard place to take for a siege army. Mm-hmm. But Saladin is one of the most,
powerful.
He's one of the most critically acclaimed warlords at the time. So
critically acclaimed.
He was the Ridley Scott of Islamist warlords at the time.
There you go.
And basically, the cavalry marches on Carrick. Orlando Bloom defends he was very outnumbered. Mm-hmm. They get trounced essentially. Mm-hmm. And then Alexander Siddig reveals himself to have been in the cavalry and is Saladin's right-hand man, basically.
Dun, dun, dun.
And he tells Orlando Bloom, he's like, you can go to Carrick, but you'll die there.
Yeah.
And then the cross appears on the horizon.
Fantastic. Just from thousands of meters away, you see a glistening cross.
This sequence from the scene in the like throne room where Baldwin decides to march on Jerusalem, through to Brendan Gleeson's like arrest, is sublime. It's perfect filmmaking.
Yeah, there's like these excellent pauses where you're waiting for something good to happen, and it never does.
Yeah,
and that tension goes on until the very end of the movie. And that's what makes it a fucking banger.
Yeah. Just like the silence as the cross appears over Orlando Bloom's shoulder. Ugh. And then like the look on Alexander Siddig's face. And he says like, tell my master Jerusalem has come. And just like this huge march of like hundreds of thousands of men. It's so fucking cool. Yeah. And with Edward Norton's character like right at the front, but he's like lost among this sea of people.
Of course.
It's so fucking cool. It's one of my favorite like sequences in a long time that I've watched. And and then Baldwin, very coolly of a king, spares Carrick's life essentially. Mm-hmm. And there's this other subplot happening, which I love, between Baldwin and Saladin, who respect each other a lot.
Yes.
And Saladin offers his physicians to help Baldwin, even though Baldwin is
dying
gonna die from
leprosy. Correct.
And they resolve their conflict without bloodshed. Mm-hmm. And then they enter the city, and this scene with Edward Norton is so good. Like when he makes Brendan Gleeson kiss his hand.
Oh, he takes off his glove.
Yeah.
And you can see his hand is obviously corroding from leprosy. And Brendan Gleeson very passionately kisses all over it.
Yeah.
And
but it's also like
great.
that thing of like beg for forgiveness, not
Yeah.
permission, and it's so disgusting in this
Yeah,
thing because
yeah.
Brendan Gleeson, you're like, even though he like kisses it, he's just sucking up,
He doesn't mean it.
and just like, but like the way Norton says "I am Jerusalem" is just
Ugh.
pretty amazing.
Ugh.
And then Orlando Bloom beats him with a riding crop and then collapses, and it's not good news for him. Not Orlando Bloom, excuse me, Edward Norton.
Edward Norton
Yeah.
beats the shit out of Brendan Gleeson and then falls because it was too much action for him.
Yeah. So between the thing I find interesting too is like Saladin appears not a ton in this movie. He's really good though, the guy who plays him. He also has his own little subplot of warmongers in his cabinet.
Yeah.
The one character, not Alexander Siddig, but another actor he doesn't have a name.
He's
in
an
the
angry
movie,
general.
but he is the Guy de Lucien to Saladin.
Right.
And they mirror each other in such an interesting way. And yeah.
I want to talk about Saladin because he's my absolute favorite character. I guess he's an antagonist. Would he qualify as an antagonist? Because he's not really a villain.
I don't think so.
Because he changes, or what was that you said about when an antagonist changes the motivations for the protagonist?
The antagonist is the one who makes the character change.
Oh,
the
I
protagonist.
see. Okay. Well, either way, he's not playing a hero. Saladin is clearly the enemy for Jerusalem.
Not a bad guy, though.
Not a bad guy. So, in Kingdom of Heaven, he is your non-stereotypical good guy, olive branch extending Muslim character. He's not what Hollywood has ever shown. Go on. You have raised hand.
Saladin is chivalrous, like a
Yes.
knight.
Of course, and he's a moderate Muslim, okay? For the movie, he's shown as a reasonable guy who claims that he has a right over a piece of land and he's going to fight for it, he's going to want it, but he's not going to do it in like a snaky way that some Templars would.
He also, I will say, just to point out, he has this way of embodying holiness in this film, in that at the end, when Orlando Bloom surrenders Jerusalem, he says that 100 years ago, the Christians massacred every Muslim in Jerusalem. And he says, I'm not those men.
That's right. Yeah. So there is, but like even before he gets to the end of where you find out, oh, this is Saladin's character, it's shown every single step of the way that he is a religious guy, but he's not a fanatic, right? He's not radicalized in a way that every fucking just dumb movie shows Muslim people to be. So there is this like humbling moment where there's one scene where he's talking to the villain in his army, the angry general.
He's called the mullah in the movie.
Right. And he says, how many battles did God win for Muslims before I came? Right? Which is such a cool scene.
Such a dunk too.
And yeah exactly. Because he's like, oh, you guys go on about your gods, but then really it's men out here getting shit done. And so Ridley Scott is trying to show good guys on both Christian side and Muslim sides. And I feel like Ridley Scott downplayed the religiosity of Saladin a little bit. Do
Definitely.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it is refreshing to see that, right? He is a king. Saladin is a king. He is wise. He's practical. He's moderate. He's virtuous, like he said. He's honorable man. And something that I missed earlier, which you pointed out in the film, was that when Saladin makes sure not to disrespect the cross, when he's walking on the floor, and if the tiles have like the cross on it, he walks around it. He doesn't want to step on it with his feet.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fantastic little...
Yeah.
Like a tiny little scene there.
It's not in the movie, but something I read on like the Wikipedia page of Saladin was that there was like a quote associated with him where he said a ruler's hands should be like something or other should have holes in them so that the wealth falls through to the people he rules, essentially. Really
Beautiful.
interesting. He died like poor. The dynasty that Saladin, the Abbasid dynasty, like lasted only like 50 years. The quote unquote dynasty, yes, very short lived, but he is considered like an Islamist hero essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are accounts of him being ruthless in real life, right? Of course, like
Oh,
he
yeah.
would have had to do
I mean, look at the battle later.
exactly.
He fucking wrecks them.
He beheads some of the enemies.
Yeah.
He puts their heads on pikes. There is a depiction of all of that in the film as well, but in dialogue, in movement, he's shown as this romanticized philosopher king
Yeah.
who's just coming to get what he's owed.
I think his image has been revitalized in history, even in the West too.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is true. I'm not a historian, right? But it has been like respectfully revitalized.
Oh yeah, there's like takes of him having united these Muslim kingdoms against the Crusaders to get control of the Holy Land. And before all of this even happens, before we see all of the take of Saladin's army and what their perspective is in the Kingdom of Heaven, leading up to it, to the battle, there's a rousing speech by Orlando Bloom. Should we get into it?
No, we're not even. We got lots left.
Are we not there yet? Okay.
Oh God, no.
Oh.
So we can move through this bit of the plot a little more because this. Okay, so after the Battle of Carrick, basically, well, there's an intermission first of all.
There's an intermission. The screen goes black.
But also there's like a lot of setup for the end of the film for like
Yeah.
the next 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And basically, like what happens here is Baldwin is dying. Brendan Gleeson's arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Sibylla is readying her son to take over the throne. Baldwin dies. Before he does that, he says, Orlando Bloom, if you could marry my sister, Sibylla, and I could kill Guy, would you do it and command the armies of Jerusalem to keep the peace? And Orlando Bloom says no, because he's too nice of a guy.
Dude. Yeah.
And Jeremy Irons, as really, that's another beautifully written scene when he says, "You once said that a king can move a man." Basically, it's really, really good. And Baldwin is like, I knew you'd say that. Fuck. Baldwin dies.
Yeah.
And Sibylla, her son, becomes king. And then they find out that her son has leprosy.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Leprosy in this movie is yet another example of the will of God, because nobody understood it at the time, really. And it seemed to have struck them as the will of God, basically.
Yeah.
Sibylla murders her own son, basically, and that really messes her up. And she allows Guy to take control of the armies of Jerusalem as she rules with him. You know, Guy tries to have Orlando Bloom's character killed. Orlando Bloom, obviously, he beats a man to death with a rock and kills another guy. It's pretty sick scene.
Sick, yeah.
And when he surprises Guy's like, all right, rah, war is good. He's like, I want to go fight Saladin because I'm an idiot. And Orlando Bloom shows up, and Orlando Bloom, the king of all engineering, says like, maybe don't go far away from water, dipshit. And Guy is like, no, I want to. We're at Jerusalem. God wills it, blah, blah, blah. Guy heads out into the desert to fight Saladin.
You dummy.
Saladin dunks on them so hard. Like fucking this is India, Pakistan 1971 style. Just
India, Pakistan friggin' 2019 styles. Who knows? No, just India 2019, because we already got internal conflict. But yeah.
But it is like, it's a total massacre. And then Saladin kills a bunch of people, and then basically is going to march on Jerusalem. Now, there is a great scene as Balian and Tiberius ride out to be like, wow, how many people died out here?
Yeah.
they go and they see the aftermath. And Irons says, as they look upon all of these dead bodies, including David Thewlis is dead. He says that I've seen religion be used as a crutch to do all of these political actions and things like that. He's very upset. Yeah. And then he basically says, like, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go to Cyprus. You can come with me if you want. And Balian says no. So Balian's essentially abandoned by everyone. Yeah. Yeah. And then he heads back to Jerusalem. He's like, I got to defend this place. Yeah. He's a good fucking guy.
There's a lot of civilians here. I got to rally someone somehow.
So Balian in this siege essentially survives through the power of engineering.
Yep.
Which is why all your kids should be in STEM education at this point, because you could survive a siege like nothing.
Highly encourage it.
Yep. This is when Bloom starts to take off for me as a character.
That's exactly.
Which is way too late in the movie.
Which is now, when only 20 minutes of the film is left. This is when he becomes the knight that he is always wanting to be, or is shown to have the potential to be. Is this when he makes the speech? Because I literally wrote it down. I was so happy with it.
There's a long, intense siege depiction.
Yes.
It goes on for many days.
Mm-hmm.
It's really great filmmaking.
Excellent.
And Orlando Bloom knights every remaining fighter in the walls.
Yeah.
And gets prepped for getting fucked up. Yeah.
And in that speech, of course, he's surrounded by all these people, even the men, the gravediggers who buried his wife, some of the men who would have beheaded
the
Orlando
gravedigger
Bloom.
from the first scene arrives in Jerusalem to seek his own holiness.
What a nice touch.
Really cool.
Very cool. So then in the middle of this rubble, Orlando Bloom is standing and he's surrounded by these civilians, and he he says, "What is Jerusalem?" And it is such a tight sentence in itself. That's it. Like, if he just left that moment just stay, it would have been so fucking great. But even the speech that followed it was fantastic. So he says, "What is Jerusalem? Your holy places lie over Jewish temples that the Romans pulled down, that the Muslim places of worship lie over yours. Which is more holy? Is it the wall? Is it the mosque? Is it the sepulchre? Who has claim? No one has claim. Yeah. All have claim." Oh, chills.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Really good speech.
And then some guy goes, "That's blasphemy." And Orlando Bloom says, "Be quiet."
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the 10, 15, 30 seconds where actual chills, because this is word for word something you could say for 2019 New Delhi riots.
This is I know how you feel about Orlando Bloom, as we talked about, but this is kind of like, you're an advocate, as I said, for how beautifully written this script is.
Absolutely. My God.
And I never thought of it until like this week when I was rewatching the movie. I was like, there's some scenes, some of this shit, and this is so beautifully written.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's almost capped by when Bloom surrenders Jerusalem and he says, "What's Jerusalem to you?" And Saladin says, "Nothing, everything."
And and it is like obviously it's a story of the 12th century Crusades, How can it be relevant now in 2005? And Ridley Scott does such a great way of like not having Eurocentric bias fall into it. It's so hard to have this narrative after 9/11, and it is done so fucking well.
I want to talk about that, about what you just said about Eurocentrism after we get through this plot, because I have something kind of on that.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, big long siege, really great.
Mm-hmm.
Bloom ends up surrendering Jerusalem for safe passage of all people to Christian lands.
Yeah.
And Saladin takes it over, and there's this scene where he doesn't walk on the cross, and you know what's interesting about that scene, which I learned again from the commentary, and you just said, which I pointed out. I was like, it's interesting how he walks around the cross on the floor.
Yeah.
The whole time he's surrounded by, which I didn't know, which is a historical thing, which is really, really interesting. As he does that, everyone around him are Muslim clerics.
Yeah.
And they're cleansing, quote unquote, the temple with rose water and rose petals.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that really fascinating, because there's this man in the middle of all of these very religious men who are cleansing a temple while he still shows this modicum of respect for the cross. I found that really fascinating.
So good. Because he's a chill guy.
And so during this time too, and Monahan admits this is an issue in the script, we kind of lose Eva Green. So what she's done is basically denounced queenhood. She's cut off all her hair, and she leaves the city as a regular woman.
And I want to say that is one of the biggest differences from the theatrical cut.
Did we mention she murders her child?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So in the theatrical take, all of that is gone. Her son doesn't even exist. And what a loss that is. Can you believe it?
Oh my God.
So the whole part about her son having leprosy, her having a son at all, her son having leprosy, her son being now the king of Jerusalem, her having to murder her son. All of that makes her seem like, oh, it's not coming from a place of grief or loss. It's coming from a place of ambition and greed.
It makes her seem like she's just upset to be married to a fucking bum.
And she's reduced to this fucking
her character is reduced to, her character is only how it relates to the man she's involved with.
And I cannot believe they cut it out.
That is kind of problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at least in the director's cut, they kept this kid and they showed this side of her as a mother doing what's best for the child, foregoing her own want to be the queen of Beirut or whatever she says.
The scene where they see him, the hot wax fall on his hand. She's so good in that sequence of scenes, and it's such, you can tell it's like she's been punched in the fucking stomach.
Yeah. When
she sees that he doesn't feel pain.
Yeah.
And there's like a really beautiful scene between her and Jeremy Irons too, which Anyway, but so she leaves the city on foot, and Orlando Bloom finds her and walks with her, and they return. The ending is so good. Like, so they return to France. They return literally to this village that Bloom is from, and he walks out of this house, and it mimics exactly the scene where he walks out with his baby crib, which he burns in the fire. And he goes down to where he used to live, and he sees that buds have grown on the tree that he planted for his wife.
Yeah, and or that she was planting in the first scene, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Nice.
And then you reveal that Eva Green has come with him, basically. And then he encounters Crusaders on their way to Jerusalem, looking for the defender of Jerusalem. And the Crusaders are Richard the Lionheart.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. Who would go on to do the Third Crusade.
That's right.
And then the final shot is them riding past his wife's grave. And he knows that it's there, obviously. Eva Green doesn't. But there's a beautiful look he gives. Like, speaking of Orlando Bloom and his acting, there's this beautiful look where he's not like, he's conflicted a little bit.
Of course.
Seems he looks at it and it's like he like looks over it and he feels that sadness, even though he's started a completely new life with a new woman.
Yeah.
And quote unquote has like moved on and let go.
Yeah.
But there's this small moment where it's this kind of like, you still feel the sadness for that past life, you know?
When he's riding past her grave, Sibylla keeps going on her horse, but Orlando Bloom stops for a second, turns around, looks at his wife's grave, and then joins her as he rides past. So that was like the conclusion to
comes full circle.
Yeah.
I love a movie that comes full circle, especially after a very, very long time.
Me too.
Yeah, fucking
very
hell,
wholesome.
And yeah, like I said, like I love the idea of Sibylla having switched places with Bloom in a way.
Yes.
I really think that's
really
an interesting
good point.
Yeah.
I didn't even clock that. That was like
that is what made me kind of be like, this is why she is protagonist 1B in a way. She goes through and begins a new journey as well. Yeah. It's just different from Bloom's. And that's what makes her character very whole in this film, and not, unlike the theatrical cut,
which she's
not
just,
a cipher, a bit of a cipher.
Right.
You know?
That's a better word.
Whew, man.
I am so glad this movie just forgoes all that need to be like have exact historical fidelity with everything that happened in the Crusades or the Templars and blah blah blah. Who cares? Focus on the morality aspect like you did. Double down on giving your characters like more mass. Like,
well, so Monahan and Scott are pretty confident in their historical accuracy. Although Monahan he said in the thing, he was like he's a huge Crusades head. Like, he knows a lot about it. He did a lot of research, but he was like, he's got a wonderful voice too. He should host this podcast with us. We just talk about The Departed every week. But he has a wonderful voice, and what does he call it? He says, like, as a dramatist, you have to sometimes forgo accuracy for dramatic reasoning or something like that. Like something, but he says like something really smart where he was like, He's like, I know all about this stuff, but you sometimes have to make different choices to, hold the drama of the fucking thing.
Totally.
And I totally agree. Yeah. You don't have anything to say?
I'm just basking in the thought of having seen this movie twice.
It's
in the span of a week. And I still want to see it. And I know it's not one of Ridley Scott's most acclaimed movies. It is so fucking good. It is so good. I wish it got more than whatever 39% Rotten Tomatoes or whatever it had right now. It's
a movie that it just grew in my esteem. The more I kind of looked into it and watched it, I was like, I'm so impressed by it,
Yeah.
And I think that it handles, like I said, really simple themes in a really beautiful way. The ideas of forgiveness and redemption.
Yeah.
Starting over your life. Things like that. I don't know. I think it does it really delicately, and a lot of the criticism comes through from misunderstanding of the film, I think, and mischaracterizing, some of the I saw quotes from one review where it was someone called it Osama bin Laden's version of the Crusades, as if it would inflame, what are they?
Radicals?
Radicals. Radicalized Islamic folks into all of the stuff that was happening then, when everyone was all Muslims are terrorists, and they just dismiss it. That time was so crazy for that. And like I said earlier, we've moved on to worse than, we moved on to other horrible things.
But this movie is able to hit all those points without that weird Western bias.
And I think there's definitely points, I think, as a Westerner myself, where maybe I'm not seeing the bias, but something I thought a lot about was this movie has a lot of themes of, you could argue, and I don't agree with this, but you could argue there's themes of white saviorism, there's themes of Orientalism, there's themes of othering, but this movie is, first off, it's historically accurate that Balian did save Jerusalem in this thing. However, there's around this time, 2005 for one. Just let's talk about 2005.
Yeah.
There were many movies that were about the West infringing upon the other in some way, quote, I say that in quotes, and being completely thwarted by the complexities of that action. So let's talk about a couple of those movies. Jarhead.
Yeah.
We talked extensively about Jarhead.
Right.
Syriana. Munich.
Oh my God. Was that all pre-2005?
It is This is 2005.
Jeez. Okay.
The Constant Gardener.
Oh, wow.
The New World. Hustle and Flow.
You know how they feel about Eurocentric bias.
Sorry, I had to throw a little something in there because we've been so serious this episode.
Yeah.
But a lot of those movies are about the complexities of Western motivations on
everyone else,
everywhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
And I find those movies I like all of those movies, and I think this Monahan says that he wasn't totally inspired by things that were happening with the Iraq War. Like I said, he's a huge fan of the Crusades. Huge fan of the Crusades. He's loves the Denver Nuggets or something. Yeah. But he's a big fan of that period of history, and he said it didn't have a lot to do with it, but it's hard to watch this movie and not read that into it. Even I thought of all of the siege engines firing the fireballs and stuff. I was like, is that not slightly referencing shock and awe in Iraq and things like that? And it's hard to not see that because so many movies are concerned with a similar theme at that time.
Yeah.
But
Siege is Siege. How else would they have shown it? They have to show brutality to the extent that they did, which was pretty pared back for a movie about laying claim to land. This was mostly about man's struggle, about coming in terms with his morality, what it means to be religious.
We've said it before. There are many themes in this film where the simplistic way for people to justify their action is like, it's God's will.
Yeah.
Therefore, we deserve Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And therefore, taking it will be God's will, and therefore it will be easy.
Yeah.
And it's not, because God doesn't exist. And it's not that, just because you think you deserve it doesn't mean you can have it.
Right.
And how can you not draw a comparison to unjust wars happening in the early 21st century?
Yeah.
Whereas it's kind of like, we deserve to do this. We're meant to do this. And it is, therefore it's just. And it's like, well, it's not. And it's a lot more complicated than that, And I don't know. I just found that theme really interesting.
But there is a good part where Bailey and Orlando Bloom's character, towards the end somewhere, he says, God doesn't speak to me.
No, that's at the beginning.
Is that at the beginning?
Yeah.
Or like just after the first interaction with the army, I guess. And then was it David Thewlis's character or someone who says to him, how can you have done all that you have done so far if God didn't speak to you or believe in you?
Yeah. You never know what's real.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to know.
Yeah.
Which is, first of all, like that's part of the mysteriousness around faith and God. But it's also kind of like, yeah, but he did it, Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sick movie.
Yeah. Holy shit. Yeah.
I have my top 5 thoughts.
Okay. Hit me with your top 5.
So, top 5 facial masks that could replace the Leper King Edward Norton's current mask.
Where are the masks from? Like from other cinema or
from other movies?
Okay.
Number 5. And this is a serious recommendation, and I wish they had the technology to do it then. But do you know from the Watchmen TV show Looking Glass?
Oh, yeah.
Tim Blake Nelson's sick mirror.
It's pretty similar,
reflecty. It is pretty similar.
Yeah.
But I think it's... Oh, you shush, all right? It's daunting and cool, and it made me think of him. So I think that would be one of the options. Number 4, and this is like historically accurate and something that would be available with the technology then, something that they could make happen, is Jim Carrey's The Mask. Mask. What? It's wood.
Yeah, that was based on a true story, wasn't it?
I just mean they would have wood in Jerusalem, and they could, just carve it out, and it'd be cool.
I wish I could think of a mask quote to use as Edward Norton the leper.
Smokin'. Number 3.
Saladin marches. Smokin'.
Just all yellow. Oh my God, it was not the cross that you saw from across the battlefield. It was his costume.
It was Jim Carrey crucified as the mask. Yeah.
Oh Jesus! All right, blasphemy. Number 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle mask. And I know
who's Shredder or the turtles?
The turtles, and I know that's their face. It's not a mask, but you know what I mean. Like, it's not just the eye patch; it's the whole turtle head. Basically, Edward Norton's Michelangelo.
Okay.
It's the orange one, right? I think it would look cute.
Yeah.
Slay. Number 2, and this is a serious one, and mostly because towards the end, when Sibylla takes off Ed Norton's mask and reveals his face that's eaten by leprosy, it's mostly the lower half, right? It's the nose. He
doesn't have a nose.
It's just gone.
Yeah.
So for that purpose, because he has beautiful eyes, he could pull off Hannibal Lecter's Silence of the Lambs mask. Just the mouth covered enough. And then, you could still gaze into the King of Jerusalem's
Love
eyes.
your suit.
Yeah. And finally, the number 1 mask that could replace Edward Norton's King of Jerusalem mask is Mike Myers' mask. But
which one?
It's not from Halloween. It's the Austin Powers one. It's just the face of Austin Powers. This is a shout out to Baby Driver.
That's not a... Oh, God, yeah.
That's
the only funny part of Baby Driver.
Those are the only...
Yeah. The only good
only
part of Baby Driver.
options.
Yeah.
You know what? I've never seen Baby Driver, but I do remember that one.
Oh, you've
scene
seen
very
if you
distinctly.
that's in the isn't that in
Edgar
the
Wright
trailer?
universe?
Isn't that in the trailer?
I think so. Yeah.
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 It's like the one joke in Baby Driver because that movie is like not that funny weirdly.
Damn. Really?
Yeah. Do you think? Hold on. Do you think Baldwin would look good in an Ansel Elgort mask?
No.
a custom Elgort?
No, he's not a baby little child baby.
No, he's a Tokyo Vice reporter now, baby.
Still a child baby reporter.
No, he's a full adult. He's a full-time adult in that show.
He's basically a small Ed Norton in that film. Isn't he? But yeah, Austin Powers, #1 mask.
Yeah.
Kingdom of Dreams. That's the dream. That's the #1 dream. Sick mask, bro. Thank you for listening.
Oh man, yes. All right. I'm just like I want to.
You're basking in it now.
I am basking in it.
Yeah.
This movie is so good.
Hell yeah.
Go back and appreciate Ridley Scott for how fucking good he is.
Please watch the director's cut.
Watch
Never watch
the Roadshow director's cut.
Never watch the theatrical one.
No, you'll just be disappointed.
Love you all.
Scott Fest continues next week.
Mwah.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.